Hello and welcome to Home Media Minefield presents Let's See What's Out There, an entertainment video stream focused on film, television and related topics. My name's Keith Isles. I'm an independent filmmaker and lifelong enthusiast of movies and TV series. And today we're doing a special bonus episode. If it is your first time here, and you enjoy this sort of thing, then please consider giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel to check out some of the other work that we do. And if you hit the bell icon, you'll get notified as and when new material drops. We do material, as I said, based around film and television, all sorts of aspects of it. Now, one of the things about being so passionate about films and obviously loving to watch them and study how they've been made, one of the key components is, of course, festivals. So I am really pleased. In a couple of weeks' time, I'll be going to Fright Fest, as I've been doing for the last 10 years. But a couple of weeks ago, I was lucky enough to go to a few of the screenings and some of the events that they had at the first London Action Festival. And I'm delighted today to be joined by the two men responsible for putting this festival on at short notice. So welcome to the stream for today. I have Ron Fogelman and Julian Alcantara.
Hello.
Welcome both. Oh, let's get the screen right. There you go. How you doing?
Really good.
Very well. Good evening, Keith.
Good. Really nice to have you both on the show. And I'm looking forward to digging in and discussing this event, how you went about putting it on, and obviously for anybody that didn't attend, we can go into some detail about what the weekend involved, because obviously it involved a lot more than just showing movies. It involved, workshops and all sorts of presentations, which were very impressive indeed. Thank you so much for coming on. The reason I wanted to have you on here was to, as I said, dig into this topic in a bit more depth, because action movies, I know for me personally, I grew up in this wonderful era of action films, and they've always been, along with horror and sci-fi and many, many other genres, but action's always been one of my favorites. But before we actually get into the festival event this year and how it went and how you put it together, I wonder whether you could each tell me a little bit about yourself, what your relationship is with movies and particularly action genre, and sort of what you do, whether you're involved in the business, that sort of thing. So I don't mind who starts.
Well, Julian,
Go on, Ron.
you go first. You go first. Who the hell are you, Julian? No, you go first.
Keith, this will be the first time that Ron won't be going first, and I don't think we need to change the habits of a lifetime. Go on, mate. You can do it. Off you go.
Well,
pretend you're in the Grand National.
We have both dedicated our lives to film and TV, either watching it or being in the industry. In fact, we have known each other for quite some time because we worked back in the day when we were mean-spirited studio executives at Universal Studios together here in London, dealing with their international side of the business. And before that, Hologram, which was always the hope for the first European studio, and was a fantastic opportunity and a great place to really, cut your teeth in the industry. Since those days, we've stayed regularly in touch through all the different things we've done, which are all sorts of things, and we'll touch on those later. And then it led us to a cafe, I think towards the end of last year, where Julian had an idea, and I actually thought it was a bit of a good one. Julian, do you want to take the story out from there?
Julian, do you want to carry on that story?
Do you want to take the story from there? Who are you?
Like an Olympic relay race, I'll seamlessly pick up the baton and run on with it. No, it's the thought of it before I first raised it with Ron, Keith, came about sort of some time ago in sort of fits and starts, but in some ways it's a bit of a lockdown idea. I've been a guest at, advisor to, and worked with a number of film festivals around the world over the course of my career. And what's fantastic is you get to see things that work, things that don't. A lot of it just being, project management and execution. But ultimately, what really matters is that people are going to judge it not by how easy or hard it was to put on, but ultimately what it is, what they put in front of you. And so
Yes.
one of the things that really sort of struck me when, like so many of us, I had much more time during lockdown than we had what to do with, was this sense of sort of revisiting this idea of how action, as much as it's the most popular genre and globally produced, doesn't really get its due. And I mean due in the sense of not necessarily, Academy Award recognition or anything like that, or hopefully we can come to that later. But the idea that it really takes a lot of skill, a lot of talent to put on things that are, absolutely incredible and very much for the big screen. And even nowadays, increasingly a lot of the stuff and those skills are going on our small screen. And Ron and I have seen examples of stuff that's made for TV that looks absolutely incredible when projected up on a cinema screen. So
Yes.
that really sort of was what planted the seed. And I have to say, a fairly in-depth Google search to make sure that what else did exist or had existed around the time, before mentioning it to Ron and a few others in our sort of close cohort of crazies that got together to do this.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, I mean, what a great idea. And I'm glad that you were able to pull this off. I'm sure there's a interesting story about how that was probably against all odds, but you still did it, which is great.
That nails it, Keith.
Like a hero. Yeah, like a hero in an action film.
Well,
Yeah.
to quote Harrison Ford as Han Solo in Empire Strikes Back, never tell us the odds.
There you go. Love it. Love it. So before we actually get on to the festival, though, can you tell me a little bit? I mean, obviously, like as you said, you've worked in the industry to a capacity, which is great. What sort of? I mean, I want to delve a little bit into, what films inspired you, and whether you've got, obviously action movies must be amongst your favorites, otherwise you wouldn't have put this together, and like you said, they don't always get their due. But I wondered, obviously we're going to talk about some of the specific ones that you showed at this festival, but I just wondered if there's any others that you want to sort of talk about, whether you want to do a bit of a memory lane thing about, when you first saw a particular movie and what that did, because I go on about it all the time. So
Wow, it's if you hear any. To be fair, Keith, if you hear any pause, certainly from me on this, it's not a lack of things to talk about. It's just trying to filter out something that doesn't take up the next 2 hours and sort of bore everybody silly, because there is a sense sometimes, just sheer enthusiasm that can come through, that as you're talking through, you'll remember something else and something else and something else. So there are all sorts. I mean, one of the first ones I have to say to go to is the one that is very beautifully positioned right behind your right shoulder, which and that it's amazing over time, definitely. I actually have that very same DVD sitting in my collection as well.
Well, if we're going to do the show and tell aspect of this is the original Die Hard UK press kit,
Wow.
which says opens at the Odeon West End, Leicester Square at February 1989, and it includes the stills and all the original publicity information. And I came across this just because we've done some renovation, and I realised, wow, I've still got this. So yes, we've been Die Hard fans for a very long time. That's for certain. I think that proves that.
But in some ways, Keith, it's not something that you love in the moment. It's genuinely something that sort of stays with you. I mean, I don't know what your definition of a classic is, or what other people's definition of classics are, but things that certainly stand the test of time, stand up to repeated viewing. I mean, I saw Die Hard on the big screen for the very first time, not actually during our festival, but the first time was literally just last Christmas, when I think as part of when cinemas were reopening, a lot of classic films were being put up on the big screen again, some of them for the first time, and you see it again, and you're just utterly transported. The idea that this incredible piece of filmmaking was over 30 years old is other than the odd bit of fashion hairstyling, it just absolutely.
And that was just me.
Yes, it does, but it's just one of those things that ultimately these action movies are stuff that stays with you. Unlike anything else, part of what it is, and coming to the idea of programming the festival and the ideas of what you talk to. Equally, in action movies, there are good, and there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's not to say that the bad movies were necessarily easier to make or any less skillful, particularly by in terms of sort of the stunt coordination, etc. on those. But it's the fact that when you combine all these ingredients together, with a group of chefs that know what they're doing, it ends up being greater than the sum of its parts. And Die Hard in particular is a perfect example of that. If only by looking at the number of imitators who since, tried to come out. And people forget that it was not just a franchise starter, it was almost a genre starter in its own way.
Yeah. Oh, no, for sure. I mean, that was alluding to the sort of point I made at the beginning is, I'm often, quoted as saying, oh, I wish I was, from a filmmaking point of view, as a filmmaker, I kind of wish I was born 20 years later, not only to obviously be younger now, but just because the ability, the tools now to make a film and the platform, such as how we're showing this sort of thing, to put your work out there is obviously much more accessible than it ever was. Back when I was at film school, it was kind of a little bit elitist, because it was just that transition from shooting on film to moving over to digital and all of this sort of thing. But a lot of the kit and whatever was still very expensive, and it was quite hard to do. And of course, it's very hard still to make a decent movie, even though those tools are more open and accessible. And of course, even with these platforms, the hard thing now is getting it seen by the right people. But the point I was sort of making was, even though I say that, the time I grew up in, I think, was a really great time for many of these quality action movies. The 80s and 90s, not only did you have everything that followed the Star Wars era, but you also, you had like the slasher era in the horror side of things, but action movie wise, you had some fantastic action movies. And I know there'd been plenty before, and there's still been loads since as well, but I don't know whether you guys feel that way, but I feel that that time when there were the Die Hard films and the Lethal Weapon series and things of that nature, it just felt like a special time. Do you agree, or is that me just with my nostalgia?
I think it's on? I'll see what Ron thinks in a second, but to be fair, Keith, I think one of the things that we forget, and certainly people who are too young to remember certainly won't remember, part of the problem we have nowadays is just the sheer overabundance of films. I mean, literally, back then, the idea that you'd have one or two special releases coming out in the summer, the idea that every single weekend could see a major film being released by a major studio throughout the entire year, you'd have been laughed out of the room.
Yes.
So in some respects, they were special not just because they were good, but also because they were really given time to find an audience. There wasn't that much else about. So you found that incredible period where special effects, both physical and digital, as they started to come into their own into the 90s and noughties, really started to find a voice to be able to take the vision of filmmakers forward. You've got plenty of films that have famously done incredible stunts, with very limited technology, whether you go back to, the chariot race in Ben-Hur or any of the Bond films from the 70s or into the 80s. But this sense of what it delivered on screen was really kind of quite something. So I think part and parcel of it was the fact that there were fewer of them, that you could really spend time and appreciate them, rather than literally, it's like every other second there's something fantastic coming your way. And part of the shame, shame's too strong a word, but that I feel for a lot of audiences, particularly who have Netflix, is they're not going to be watching something like Extraction from Sam Hargrave on a big screen. They're going to be seeing it at home, and that's an example of a modern action film. And Sam is, a stunt genius in his own way. In the same breath as someone like David Leitch, who's doing incredible stuff, but a lot of it's going to be seen on the small screen.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, everything now is so accessible, whether it's old stuff, old classics, or newly produced. I mean, we are, streaming platforms, you've just got everything at your fingertips. I mean, part of the reason I wore this T-shirt today is, you know, my childhood. A lot of films I saw, if I wasn't able to go and see them at the cinema, was through VHS. You know, and you know, obviously that was, again, I think, a great time because you could go to the library and see films. Sometimes I wasn't old enough necessarily to see the film, but I got to see it on VHS. But at the same time, you know, you can't beat watching stuff on the big screen, and that was one of the delights of the event that you guys put together, was the fact that it was so nice to see, you know, even if the prints were a bit old and you know, a bit scratchy in places, it was still wonderful to watch it on the big screen with an audience of like-minded people that you know, can enjoy that sort of thing.
Well, you're talking about Conair, aren't you, Keith? There,
I am, which we'll come to. I'm sure.
Can I just say, just so again, that you know, sometimes people read into things that have happened, and the truth of that, very simply, is there is literally one 35mm print of Conair in the country.
Right.
Nothing else. It has not been digitized at all. So that one print came down to the Prince Charles Cinema, came across to us a couple of weeks later, made its way up to Newcastle after us. You know, so it's traveling around and it's been pretty well used. But interestingly, it's one of those that, again, there's a warmth to it with the scratchiness of feelings. You're watching something that almost Cinema Paradiso-esque. You know, it is sort of real cinema, as opposed to the digital perfection that you come to expect in a lot of other things. And, you know, I have to say, I don't think I'm betraying the confidence that the head of projection at Picture House, who is a wonderful man called Paul Perkins, who was, he said, I've actually played stuff that's a lot worse than this before. But then when he realized that the director was seeing it on the big screen for the very first time since its premiere, sort of made him a little bit, oh, you know, is this going to be up to scratch at all? So, yeah.
No, absolutely. We'll come on to guests and stuff later, but yeah, Ron, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's something that you touched upon that meant a lot to me, and was always inspired by when Julian and I first sat down and started to think, right, this is a good idea, but how do we shape it? Which direction do we take it, and how can we make it happen? And that is that, you know, partly inspired by my kids, is that experience of sitting with people, you said, like-minded, in a community atmosphere of cinema and enjoying a film together, is something which we've got to be very careful with, because it's in danger of getting lost, and yet it's so important. And I think that screening of Die Hard, 700 people all there, most had seen the film, not everyone, but they had that communal experience, and that's what we really hoped for. And we really designed an evening, which was the ethos of the whole festival, that we wanted it to be both fun and informative. And I think the way we constructed that night, it achieved both things. I mean, for me growing up, I remember going to the cinema, and I would see anything, just anything that I was allowed to see. And particularly in the half-term holidays, you know, there'd be a matinee that would be sold out, and it could be utter rubbish, but it didn't matter. And the minute the certificate played up on the maroon crusty curtains, every child in that audience just screamed and kicked their feet on the floor, and you got this really incredible feeling of just, I'd say, power. It just felt incredible, and you thought, I'm here and I'm part of that. And now, you know, just because of the nature of multiplexes, and you can go and see the same film, you know, the same venue every half hour, because no one wants to miss out on your, you know, your ticket fee. You know, I don't see, when I take my kids to the movies, that same kind of experience often. Maybe on the opening weekend of a Marvel movie or a Bond or something like that. But that, to me, is an integral part. The audience are in some ways just as important as the movie. And what was so fantastic, not just in terms of the other events that we put on around the Die Hard screening, but the response of the audience, you know, was as if it was 1988 and it was its opening night. I mean, it was, you know, and you were there, Keith, so I'm not trying to say anything, but it was just very special. And that's something that we really, Julian and I and Lee, our chairman, we really set out to sort of try and create, you know, a centre for film lovers, a place where it doesn't matter what your knowledge is, whether it's, you know, you are the die-hardest Die Hard fan, or you're someone that's just interested and you just have a curiosity. We wanted this to be an experience for you, and I think that's what we achieved, not just on that screening, but hopefully across the whole of the 4-day event.
Yeah, well, certainly the bits that I was there for. I would absolutely say that. As I said, I know I missed quite a bit this year, which hopefully next year, which hopefully there'll be a next year. I'm sure we'll come on to that. But you know, I would like to see more of it. But yeah, you know, I'm hoping with regards to especially what we've been through. In the last couple of years, you know, the whole thing with cinema and the boom of streaming and more platforms that are streaming, etc. I mean, even though my channel is Home Media Minefield and talks about, you know, physical media and streaming and films at home and all of that sort of stuff, for me, nothing beats the big screen experience. You know, I saw The Grey Man recently, which is on Netflix, but I specifically went to the cinema to see that. I was happy to pay to see it, even though I've got Netflix, because I wanted to see it on the big screen. I was disappointed that Prey wasn't shown on the big screen, because I've recently done a pod or a video stream about that as well. And yeah, I mean, this is why I love Fright Fest. This is why I love festival screenings, all of that sort of thing, because you get that atmosphere. And I'm really hoping films like Top Gun Maverick is going to be the thing that's literally going to bring people back to the cinema, because obviously the success that that's had has taken the industry by surprise, right? Because Tom Cruise, bless him, dug his heels in and said, you know, he wasn't going to let that be shown on streaming. It had to wait for the cinema. And I don't know about you guys, I saw it in IMAX, and those sequences blew me away, you know.
Same here. The one thing, though, I think is a slight counter to that, Keith, although I'm completely in agreement with what you've said, is that there are people who don't necessarily have a cinema near them, or don't necessarily get a chance to see a film because it wasn't distributed in their country. So the fact that they get to see them at all is, I think, a great start for those that particularly have access to streaming platforms. You know, the idea that so many great classics, the vast majority of people, I think, who will have seen Die Hard over the last 30 years will have seen that on a small screen, unless they saw it in a, you know, the rare reissues or when it first came out. So that incredible love has just grown on the small screen. So giving a people a chance to experience it as the filmmakers intended on something big, you know, with that mad, big sound and sort of the collective experience. That's the other thing I think that the small screen really doesn't give you. Obviously it can't, which is that sense of the energy in the room. You know, 600 people laughing at the same time, screaming at the same time, you know, clapping at the same time. I mean, it's, you know, it's mad, but it's true. And that, I think, has been a common part of the sort of the cinema going experience almost since its very beginning. You know, so to feel that that kind of thing still goes on, that collective experience, is something, one of the reasons why I think big screen cinema, for the right films, like a Top Gun Maverick and so on, won't ever die.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't mean to sort of take away from the fact that I realize, you know, living in London, I'm incredibly blessed because, you know, we have, you know, the BFI, and we have Prince Charles Cinema, and we've got cinemas everywhere. And I'm fortunate enough to be a BAFTA member as well. So I get to see, you know, films on the big screen all the time. And I do realize I'm blessed and lucky for that. And you're right, not everybody has access to it as readily as we do. So I didn't mean that in a way that that came across as elitist. I hope it didn't.
Oh no, not at all. It wasn't, nothing to do with elitist at all. It's just simply a fact that absolutely, if you get a chance, great to see stuff on a big screen. It's just that not everybody is lucky enough to be able to do that. You know, and if it's a choice between seeing it on small screen or not at all, by all means, seeing it on small screen.
Well, yeah, we're back to my VHS point again, aren't we? So yeah.
One of the things that was really lovely, which was a friend of mine came to see the film. He hadn't seen it on the big screen, and he brought his son, and he turned around to me and said, "This was the best father and son night out we've ever had." Which you know, believe me, that just blew my mind, because it was just. You know, I guess you had to be in the room, and that's what cinema should be about. It's an experience, not just a download. And it's, you know, that really choked me up when he said that, because kind of that's what we hope we can inspire, which is people's love of cinema. And that's nothing against, you know, you know, the likelihood is that I've seen Die Hard in every format possible, from when its original release was on 35 or 70 millimeter through to VHS, to DVD, to pay TV, to free TV. I've seen it all. The only thing I haven't seen is the flickbook version of the film. But you know, I think what we want to try and encourage is in enjoyment of cinema in all its forms, and not to lose sight, not just for the latest releases like Top Gun Maverick, which was a blast, but also to help the next generation and generations to come not lose sight of the appreciation that of classic cinema. Now, I can't think of Die Hard as classic cinema really in my mind. It's a great, brilliant masterpiece of a movie, but it only feels like it's 10 minutes old in my head. I can't believe it's 34 years.
Yeah.
And yet what was really satisfying is that when cinema's done well and it's great, it holds its own. And as we were discussing before, if you were watching that movie for the first time, it did not matter. It was so seamless, so perfect, so well judged, so ahead of its time. The experience of it today was just the same as it was 34 years ago, apart from maybe the odd haircut. But it's that was something that was really satisfying with that experience and with the other screenings that we did across the weekend.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start with the opening night then, and that wonderful Die Hard event that we've already been talking about. But I mean, it wasn't just the fact that you got to project and show the film on the big screen to, as you said, a multi-generational audience with people that some, like you said, their first time ever seeing this film. But like you've got there, the world's best Die Hard screening ever, probably, right? But you put on quite an event. I mean, I've got a couple of pictures there that I took that night, because obviously we had Robert Davi as a special guest who did some lounge singing as well as an interview, and then of course the great John McTiernan, the director of this. So can you talk a little bit about how you got these guys involved and how you put this whole thing together?
Well, Julian, do you want to talk about John and then I'll talk about Robert?
Yes, I mean it really started. I've known John and people who work with John for some years now, and it's interesting. I think you've got to sort of take one slight step back in this, Keith, which is, when you've got a blank slate of action films, how on earth do you fill it? And part of the problem that you have is just a sheer abundance of stuff, old and new. One of the other things that you have to recognize is that whenever you put your stake in the sand for a particular date, you're going to be too early for some things, too late for others, and there are various things that you want to do. And also, by the way, knowing that you can't be all things to all people, and nor should you try. So ultimately what you'll do, and that's something that Ron and I can talk about later, is the sense of the real appreciation of all the different parts of the craft of an action movie across it. So back to John specifically, it was, the idea of actually screening Die Hard as a special case, because it genuinely is at the top of, if not near the top of, every single action movie list around the world ever made. I mean, this is not a contentious choice at all. But if you're going to do something like this, you do have to make it a little bit special. And so the idea really was, because you've read interviews with him, and certainly he was not far from being a one-trick pony, as some filmmakers sometimes are. That he had an incredible sort of run of incredible world-class action films. That we suddenly thought, well, why not? Let's reach out to John McTiernan and see if he's interested. I mean, it really starts with something as simple as that, Kid. In many cases, you can come up with an idea where it's not the ambition of the idea, but so long as you know who to call or who to email, the worst you're going to get back is a no. So in this case, the timing worked, the circumstances worked. I think the nature of what we were looking to do made it fit, because it wasn't just Die Hard. Obviously, there was going to be a celebration of Predator as well, which is another fantastic film that's often up there in best action lists. So in that particular sense, the idea that John, as a guest, and as a headline guest for our inaugural festival, it just became a case of, well, the film qualifies, let's see what we can build around it. And so John was the first piece of that jigsaw, but I have to say that the credit to the very entertaining and relevant and just really way of making it special part beyond just an incredibly literate and profoundly thinking filmmaker that John is. The credit for the other person at that particular screening goes to Ron completely.
Well, that's very generous. I mean, what we both decided was that cinema is becoming, and this is my view, and not anyone necessarily disagrees with it, that everything we do these days is polarized. Everything's pushed to the extreme. So, the middle range ground cinema, either budget or in terms of range, sort of gets squeezed out, and what you've got is sort of very respectable, quality but very low budget specialty films, art house films being made and getting registered when it comes to Oscar time. And then, of course, the 200 million juggernauts, such as Marvel, which are great movies in their own way, but they don't sort of necessarily register outside of maybe Black Panther when it comes to award seasons. And so really what we thought was, look, we want to make sure that across the board that we respect entertainment. It's not a bad word. The skill, the craft, the energy behind all the disciplines that it takes to make an entertaining piece of movie making should not be underestimated, should not be ignored. And so that was sort of our thinking, which is let's make sure that something that's very special to us, that does tend increasingly to get overlooked come award season, gets the attention it deserves. And we thought, listen, let's balance the integrity, which clearly, bringing John McTiernan over as our special guest and doing an interview with a man who's a genius, really, and has a very unique way of looking at the world, its issues, and filmmaking. How can we sort of make sure that the evening works and sort of surprises people? And that's where the idea came. We'd looked at sort of the big debate on the internet for the last couple of years is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And so it all started with that thought of, well, this is the time where we're going to prove it. We're going to set ourselves a task. The internet's not been able to settle the debate, but we, in our own small way, we're going to try and do exactly that. And then an idea hit us, which was just bizarre, which was like, okay, it's July 28th. It's the middle of the summer. We didn't even know how hot it was going to be, but it's the middle of the British summer. So let's turn July 28th into Christmas. And so the whole idea that sort of snowballed was, we're going to make sure that everyone that enters that auditorium on July 28th gets a Santa hat. And that was sort of like just...
By the way, that's on him. That is entirely his doing. I'm not going to let any of us take credit for that great idea. That's all wrong, Steve.
But then no, literally, I think what you're seeing, and there's a third member of the team and another guy that we shouldn't lose sight of, Stuart Peter, who's been fantastic and an investor and backer, is that it really was a tremendous team effort, a Herculean task, but a team effort across all the board. So. Let's not get proprietary at all about the ideas, because it all gelled together, or at least we hope so, and we hope Keith, you feel that way as well as other members of the audience that were there. But then sort of ideas just hit you, and you just don't know if they're going to work. It was a representative of Robert reached out and said, "Hey, you do the Die Hard screening. Is there anything Robert can do?" And we were sort of thinking, okay, maybe let's have a think about this. And then something in the back of my mind reminded me that I'd heard that he was a singer, and I looked online, and sure enough, he's got an incredible voice, and he does, he's known for doing tours, across the world of Sinatra standards and that style of singing. And then it was like, the little light bulb clicked, and it was like, okay, so let's see if we can get Robert over, and we're going to get him to sing "Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow" with 700 people wearing Santa hats, and launch the show that way, because people won't be expecting that. And then will that create the atmosphere when they watch the movie that they're really up for it, and they're really sort of thinking, okay, this is something different. Let's see where this journey takes us. And so we approached Robert, and he was incredible. He was really generous, really, I think a little bit hesitant at first because he's known for singing, but he just didn't know what kind of audience he was going to come to, how it was going to be. And then we put him in touch. We got two top-rated musicians, a very celebrated pianist and a double bass player. Actually, a guy called Andy Pask, who used to be part of the band Landscape. If you go back to the 80s, he was part of the band that brought us Einstein and Go-Go. So we got him two top-class musicians and made sure that we would, make him feel that this was, really about sort of making sure that he got the support he wanted. And then he went, I want to do more than just one or two songs. And we talked to him about that, and then he came to London, did an afternoon's rehearsals, came out, And we ended up having a slice of Las Vegas, I think, that night, because we got not just the singing, which really set the mood, but also his kind of banter in between about what it was like to make the movie and his thoughts on, at the time, you know, he says that, you know, every Christmas I'm asked the movie is a Christmas movie, and he says, well, the residuals feel like a present every year, so it is a Christmas movie. And the spirit of it and the sort of the nature of threading his sort of memories of working on the movie as well as the music, that was great. And then, of course, you know, we thought, what can we do next? So we put this banner up saying, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas from everyone at the London Action Festival. And then the lyrics went up for Let It Snow, Let It Snow, and he kicked off. And what was amazing that was that everyone joined in. And, you know, and being sort of working in production and producing, one of the things that I love doing sometimes is taking a step back and just because the real benchmark of success is what the audience are doing. And when I looked around, just seeing everyone sing, everyone let go, you know, and this is a British audience who are traditionally reserved, and just go, we're having fun. This is, you know, this, we don't get this that often. That's when I think Julian and I sort of went, you know what, this is something special. I think we've done something special here, and I hope the audience feel the same way too. So that sort of gives you an indication of sort of how what starts off as the grit and the oyster of an idea, you know, starts, especially across, you know, being very fortunate to work with Julian and with Lee and with Stuart, to sort of build up something that sort of, you know, everyone's thinking, how can we make this special? And everyone's feeding ideas in, and we're kicking them around and thinking, will that work? Don't know. Will this work? I don't know, but let's give it a shot. And the end result was, I think, a night that certainly, you know, I hope the audience really had a fantastic time at. I mean, we did. We just hope they did, but it felt that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually now, you know, in hindsight, wish I'd put some more photos in the slideshow here, because you're absolutely right. I mean, not only did he do a great, you know, set there, but everybody, like you said, joined in. So everybody wore a Santa hat. You didn't get any of that, oh, I'm not wearing a Santa hat.
No.
You know, literally everyone in the audience had their Santa hat on and joined in with, you know, you got the, again, I've got a photo, I should have put it on, with the lyrics on the screen. You had the lyrics so that everybody could join in. And he was fantastic.
I'm sorry, Keith, I was going to say one thing that did make me laugh, which I heard about after the event, was that there were some people wandering around that part of London wearing Santa hats. What on earth was going on?
Yeah, what was happening? Yeah, no, absolutely, because it was what was the venue again? Sorry, it's
the Royal Geographical Society.
Right. Yes. So it was a different part of London than just being sort of in Leicester Square or whatever. So
a big shout out to Rianne, Veronica, Alfredo, the team at the Royal Geographical Society. We had the opportunity to work with them across 2 nights. They were outstanding. The venue's outstanding. And even if there isn't a London Action Festival event there, go and check this place out. It's beautiful. It's really a very special place.
Yeah. And Robert Darby, you know, he also told some great stories. And who knew that he could do such a good impression of Arnie? I mean, it's good. You know what I mean? It wasn't one of those cod, you know, impressions that people do that are just like, this was spot on. He had the mannerisms and everything. I was just like,
I mean, you know, like with anyone, you have the perception of someone and the reality of it. And when he was coming over, I just had this feeling that I'd end up sort of having to deal with problems like, you know, him holding me at gunpoint because his morning grapefruit hadn't turned up on time. But he was a lovely, lovely man, very, very great natured, really entered into the fun of it. And I think everyone saw that, you know, an amazing voice. You know, I mean, that was also, you know, what he did was he said, right, I've got an idea. And his voice came through into the auditorium before he entered. And I remember looking over and seeing one guy with a sheer look of joy on his face with a Christmas hat on, looking around everywhere. Where's the voice? Where's he coming from? It was like watching an elf get excited because Santa's entered the room. And then, of course, he entered and everyone clapped. And it was just like, okay, that was class. That was class. And that was his idea. And he just knew how to work the audience. So respect. And he was great to work with.
Yeah, he knew how to work the room and work the audience. He was great at that. And what I really loved as well was, you know, he told some good stories. I was really pleased, obviously, that as well as talking about Die Hard, of course, he talked about Bond and, you know, being the villain in License to Kill. And that was just, you know, obviously, I really appreciated that. So it was great that we got some story about that as well. So So that was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, what a great opening night. So that must have made you feel quite confident then about because I'm guessing this whole thing for you guys, as it was the first event, right, or the first event of this type, it must have been quite nerve-wracking, no? Trying to pull this together.
Well, it depends to some degree. I mean, because at least look with a screening of a film, not only do you know what you're giving to an audience, but to some degree the audience know what it is they're getting. You know, Die Hard aside, where it was really dressed up into something sort of pretty special and different. You know, but the Q&A screenings that we had with Predator and with Conair were in that sense more conventional, so an audience would understand. I think when you're trying to sort of give as much as you can to an audience, you've got to some degree, give them what they may expect, but also give them the things that they may not. And that really came across to a certain degree in a number of the panels and events that we did over the rest of the weekend, Keith.
Yeah.
Because whilst, and we'll certainly hop back to the Friday night, which was very special for all sorts of other reasons. But I think part of what it is that you've got to be, and look, this is where we took the ethos really of our senior media sponsor and great partners in this, Den of Geek, who are utterly fantastic. You know, in fact, having spoken to them by phone and by Zoom so often, it was only during the festival I got to meet a number of them in person for the very first time. But that sense of by experts for fans really counts. And by that I mean, you know, it takes a lot of effort to appear effortless when you're putting stuff on. And just sheer fan enthusiasm doesn't carry a good event off. You know, it helps fuel it, it helps genuinely to see the passion. But in terms of the right structure, the right people, the right balance, all of that has to come in. And, you know, we didn't get a chance to do everything that we wanted. There are plenty of great action films that we would have loved to have screened. I'll mention one in particular because I'm still keeping my fingers crossed that we'll be able to do so, which is John Woo's Hard Boiled, which was celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Yeah. But it's tied up in all sorts of rights complications that mean that it's, you know, it's not easy to do. But the point that, you know, you're celebrating the music and scoring of action films, the writing of action films, you know, the stunts, you know, action films, all of these, and the global nature of action films, which we touched upon in some degree in the screening of one of Jackie Chan's best films, which Warner Brothers had recently restored, as well as a sort of panel discussion. So you try and give a lot of different things for people to latch onto, but then hopefully, and this was what really great and gave part of that festival atmosphere, was that people who would come along for one thing would stay around and actually take part in others. You know, so, you know, there are people I know who came along to our festival who were interested in nothing other than the music. So they came along on our awards night on Friday night because David Arnold was performing, nothing to do with, you know, nothing to do with Vic Armstrong or John McTiernan or anyone else. That was what brought them in, and they were going to come along to the music scoring events at the weekend. But again, everybody was, you know, fed into it and came along. And what you hope is you create that atmosphere of like-minded people, you know, the lightning in the bottle you get when you bring them together.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We will come on to the other events because I definitely want to talk about those, particularly as I wasn't at all of them. So I've got questions about that. Before we do, though, this is a slightly controversial question to ask you, but I do want to ask it. So obviously we've waxed lyrical about Die Hard. We know that John also directed the third film as well, right? But I've got to ask you, what are your thoughts on the other films in the Die Hard series?
Honestly, look, I can answer this straight away. Okay. There are, if any of them feel lesser, and that some of the later ones are by comparison, it's only because they're really held to such an incredibly high standard by the first one. Right. If people think less of the second one, it's because in many respects it wasn't different enough to the first, and I still think Rennie Harlin did a bang-up job. It's still well written.
Me too.
You know, still very well performed. I think the third one is an underrated masterpiece, frankly, and runs the first one very close. Not least of which that it reunited McTiernan and Willis and people know that particularly if they've read around it, it didn't start life as a Die Hard script. It started life as a script that
Lethal
was
Weapon.
about Simon Says.
Yeah.
But creating those, I've got a very soft spot for the fourth one again. But honestly, there are none that are not worth watching. It's just, again, by comparison, that benchmark was so Olympically high, first time out, that it's very, very hard to, it's like when you're comparing Bond movies,
Yeah.
in its own way. People have their favorites, maybe their favorite Bond or their favorite Bond movie. But again, the reason things pale sometimes is not because they're objectively bad. It's just that they're paling by comparison. So that's my point of view.
That's a really good response. I like that.
I
Ron?
have to say, there's not much to add to that, except for, again, looking through my little treasure trove. This is the original press kit to Die Hard 2, so you can tell I've been a fan, which includes the let me see, the stills selections, and the notes as well. And just to make sure, at least in terms of the first three, I don't have the press kit, but I've got the souvenir. Detective John McClane is about to have a very bad day. There you go, Die Hard with a vengeance. I mean, yeah, Die Hard is a tall order. It's for me, it's cinematic perfection, and you tell that not by technically watching it, but seeing what an audience does so many years later. So it is a tough question. It's not controversial. I think the standard was set very high. Everyone tried to follow it afterwards, including McTiernan. I agree. I think the third one is I think the second one's a good job. The third one I really, really love, and the others are good. But it's, if you're going to say which is your favourite, I can't think of anyone that's going to turn around and say it's not the first one. It's just it's just the way it goes. That's not a knock against the other movies.
No, agreed. I thought I mean, for me, I love the first three movies. Basically, I love all three of those equally. Not so keen on the others, but again, it's not that I'm saying they're a bad movie. I just don't think they lost the everyman aspect of the character I felt in those films, and he was a bit more of a superhero in those ones, but I mean, that's because, of course, those films were made and coming out at a time when they're competing with other action movies that have, dare I say it, but moved on in different directions. So it might have had something to do with that as well, to be fair. But
it's possible. Yeah. But part of what I love about all of this at the end of the day, Keith, is that I don't know which are the films that really sort of create arguments between you and your friends, that they're passionate either defenders of or antagonists against.
Yes.
So that's part of the joy of this, which is, when you're coming up with a best of list or the worst of list in all of these things, you've got, passionate devotees in all of these. And I think that
we don't care if there's an argument as long as you care. I mean, if there's something at the center of it all that you're passionate to argue about, there's nothing better than sitting with your mates and sort of saying, no, that one's the best one. No, that's the best one. Or I love that bit. Or no, what are you kidding? This is, it's part of the fun. It's part of the enjoyment. And at least you've got something at the center that you care about to argue about. And that in itself serves the purpose.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can have is mediocrity. I mean, the idea that literally you leave the movies and literally the moment is like, okay, what are we having to dinner? It's you don't even bother thinking or talking about it anymore. And by the way, those movies still do exist. It's not that they suddenly disappeared, but hopefully you're not going to find any of those programmed in our festival.
Yeah, now we have similar arguments about the Lethal Weapon franchise as well, but that's a whole other thing. So, okay. In that case, let's move on then and talk a little bit. Now, forgive me, I've put these on like 3 slides here because you had like sort of 9 main events as far as I could see outside of those screenings. So I may have got them slightly out of the order that you had them on, but I don't know. Does this help prompt anything at all?
Oh no, we can literally talk about them with our eyes closed. I mean,
okay, good.
We've lived and breathed these with a frankly the only thing been lacking has been sleep in most of this, Keith. So ultimately, and it's good because you've put up on there one event that Ron was very much the master of in putting together in terms of punch above your weight, and a perfect example again of something where you want to deliver something that contributes to an audience, that they can walk out knowing much more or understanding that much more than they did before they walked in. The car chasers really, which is again a sort of celebration. Particularly, we were lucky enough to have three of the best stunt drivers in the world, speaking to an audience. And then Action's Big Night Out, which was, frankly, the sort of the mad, delightful sort of combination of a potpourri of madness that came together on the Friday night in the best possible way. But at the core of it was the celebration of two incredible icons in action cinema, in John McTiernan and Vic Armstrong.
Oh, amazing! So you had Vic Armstrong at the event. That's incredible. I didn't know that. Okay.
What didn't we have at that night, Julian? I mean, we managed to put in. We had a comedian, a top flight magician, a string piece quartet, David Arnold singing. We had a game show. We had the celebration of we had three key directors. We had discussing the set pieces that had most influenced them in cinema.
Well, hang on. We had two directors that people knew about, and a third one that was a surprise.
Indeed. So we had John McTiernan up, who selected Dr. Strangelove. We had Corin Hardy, the director of the Hello and Gangs of London, and also did a panel event later on that weekend, who selected Edgar Wright's World's End. And then Julian, who was our surprise guest?
Well, and then drum roll, the surprise guest was Edgar Wright.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
I love his work. I love his films. So
well, it was a magical moment because Corin was talking about why he loved World's End so much, and why he it was quite a recent choice of a set piece to sort of focus on. And he started talking about it. He said, "You know what? I mean, there's probably one person slightly better to talk about this set piece than myself. So why don't we get Edgar Wright to come and join us?" And then the audience just went mad, and he came and joined, and he brought with the previs and the sort of the storyboards and the previs that contributed to the famous bar scene with Simon Pegg trying to sort of avoid getting his pint spilt in the middle of a massive fight, and that was a joy to see, and really interesting. Really got a great response from the audience. So we had this I think an integrity section of the evening where it was like directors exploring work that inspired them, and then we launched this year what we called the Moving Target Award, which is sort of the festival sort of award program, and we chose to give just two awards this year. One to Vic Armstrong, and Julian is more qualified to tell you about how that came together, and one to John McTiernan himself, and those were also very special moments through during the Friday Night Showdown. Julian, do you want to talk about Vic?
Well, it is. I mean, look, I'm delighted that Vic's presence there prompted the reaction from you, Keith, that it did. No, in part because he genuinely. I mean, I know the word is sometimes often bandied around, but Vic genuinely in his particular field is an absolute legend. He's the only man who's won an Academy Award and a BAFTA for the work that he's done, who literally has been around, to see the business transform in so many ways, and, to live to tell the tale, because there are plenty of people who've suffered, if not, injuries or life-changing injuries, but certainly, lost their lives over the course of how the stunts world has evolved and in movies over the course of these years. So to be able to celebrate part of Vic's career was, I think, very special. But beyond that, there was something that we decided to do on the night, Keith, which was, to be honest, it was a roll of the dice, because it depended entirely on others, and we really didn't have too much time. But I think it's a testament to how highly both these men are thought of. That we just put the word out to various people that they've worked with if they wouldn't mind recording a tribute video of stuff that they've done.
Right.
In the case of Vic, we ended up having tributes from Paul Verhoeven, who we'd worked with on Total Recall and Starship Troopers, from Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, obviously from the Bond films, from Pierce Brosnan, from Harrison Ford, from Kenneth Branagh, who we worked with as far back as Henry V and as recently as Thor, and Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit. So, it spoke, I think, to what those people feel of those we asked them to record a tribute of, that they took the time to send it in. So
Pierce, sorry, Julian.
No, you're going to say what's that?
Yeah, Pierce obviously had the opportunity to work with both John McTiernan and with Nick. So he gave a tribute to both of them, and then we also got a really beautiful speech from Alec Baldwin, who delivered a really amusing tale about what it was like, how he was corrected on the set of Hunt for Red October on how he was acting, and it's something that stayed with him ever since, and it was a really beautiful message.
And also including Jan de Bont, who obviously, having gone on to being a great action director himself, was the DOP on Die Hard on Hunt for Red October. So he'd had that working relationship with John. So no, it was a very special evening for the audience. But also it needed to be a special evening for the people we were recognizing. And I think that's something partly by design, partly by surprise, and just partly by sheer luck. That we ended up. Never underestimate the amount that luck plays in any of these things.
Absolutely, but we tried to make sure that it was a show that had turns, because it's very easy to lose an audience, and we never gave them the chance to sort of get bored. So just when they thought, right, well, that's interesting, that's really informative, we do something that was just pure fun. So one of the things we did was we had David Arnold that came out and sang about 3 songs from that he composed for the Bond years. But then we'd already had our string piece quartet deliver compositions of action themes via string instruments. But then we got David to be the maestro versus 3 members of the audience in a round of Name That Tune, but using famous film themes. So we even had a buzzer that each of them had to press first to be able to name and the prize was to come to our after party and also to get a very rare vinyl release of Anya Taylor-Joy singing Downtown from Last Night in Soho.
Oh, yeah, which is amazing, by the way. That
and not on general release. So and that was, we had a brilliant comedian called Bennett Aaron who sort of made it sort of organized chaos, and he really came into his own in that moment. And it was, we had moments, we had the score from The Great Escape or from Jaws, which is obviously very recognizable to some lesser known ones. And it was just a lot of fun. It really worked. We weren't sure if it was just going to be something where it's just like what they're doing now. But, the audience stayed with us right to the very end. And it was quite a long show. It overran because these things are hard to sort of work out how long they'll be. And it came close to 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think. But
it wouldn't be an awards show if it didn't overrun one.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. And so again, it was a lot of ambition and a lot of, things working that, we could have hit technical problems. We could have had mics pop out. We could have had all sorts of things. But on the whole, I think people walked away going, we weren't expecting that. And that's what we really wanted to deliver, which was something where it was like a night of surprises. You didn't know quite what was going to happen next or what was going to happen or if it was going to involve you. And that was a real joy to put on and get the audience response that we got.
But Ron, you have to give some credit there to the unnamed ring mistress.
Well, of course, we were very lucky as well. We've become friendly over the years with Maria Giacchino, who's Michael Giacchino's sister.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And she's done a number of events with Michael at the Royal Albert Hall, 2 doors down from where we were at the Royal Geographical Society.
I've been to a few of them. Yeah,
they're great nights. And I said to Maria, listen, we're doing the London Action Festival. We've got a couple of other things up our sleeve that we'd all like to work on together. And I said, look, we're thinking of doing this. Do you want to come over and do it? And she said, yeah, I'm in. Where do I start? And she was amazing. And she was very supportive across the event. She's on our advisory board. But she was, she helped, she produced with us the Friday Night Showdown. And she was also very instrumental in putting together another really amazing event, which was What's the Score, which we'll talk about later, which was with Stephen Price, the Oscar-winning composer of Gravity. But we'll cover that later when you get around to asking about it.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, again, that's apparent here and that I really like, because, is you were very careful not to call this like, Action Fest or the London Action Film Festival. It's just the London Action Festival, and that's what's great is you were covering, you're covering television, you're covering other events and other aspects of the industry with this, and with action as this, if you like, the overriding theme and topic, and again, I like that it's an event that isn't just a film festival. It's more than that, right?
It's a way of life, Keith. That's what it
I
is.
like it. I like it.
And the reality is it's so easy to be judged, and we got that. The minute we sort of put our hand up and said we'd like to do this. And you can only achieve. We had 2 nights and 2 full days of programming, and with the ambition is there to do more and to really be as inclusive as possible, to embrace everyone and all forms of cinema globally. And we covered the world in action, which Julian did a great job of, sort of celebrating Hong Kong cinema. We're hoping to do a celebration of Indian cinema as well. It's not just about celebrating Western European or US cinema. The ambition is to go wider. And as we said already, a lot of the people that created these great works of action cinema were not, Paul Verhoeven was not from America.
Yes.
Jan de Bont, it's a truly global industry feeding off a whole load of really interesting people. And that's what we want to celebrate. It is individuals. It's the craft they bring to the table. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. If you've contributed something really significant to the industry, we want you to be celebrated, no matter what background you come from, who you are. It doesn't matter whether the budget you've worked with is a micro budget, and we did do the event that you sort of put up before called Punch Above Your Weight, how to make your first low budget movie, because how do you get into an industry that's traditionally known for $200 million plus movies? And it really was trying to sort of bring, I think what we really wanted to do was bring the industry and the audience together in a unique way. And so that if you came from the industry, you went, I'm really glad I'm a part of this. I felt like I got something from it. I'm glad I supported the event. And that's what we really hoped we could deliver to some of the people that took a risk with us in it being our first event. But also, putting them in front of an audience that loves the genre and is receptive to what they do, but you never know what's going to happen when you put them together. And that was, I think, the joy of putting this festival on, which is bringing the two halves together, the industry and the audience, key figures in the industry that were willing to sort of put their neck out and go, we don't know if these guys can deliver, but that we're interested in their approach and how they're going to do things. Let's give it a go. And I think those that did this time around, they enjoyed the experience. They seem to, they want to come back for more, and we hope more people will follow on in future years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, as somebody myself that loves everything about film and television, from how it's made to the, related media to all those sort of things, I think it's a great idea. Probably brings us nicely on to the next slide. So again, these are some of the other events that you had going on. So do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Sure, Julian.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the one that I was going to say I can't even take some responsibility for, but can speak to, because ultimately, which is the Don't Try This at Home, how to become a stunt professional. And in fact, actually, the name of that particular event came from the British Stunt Register's own website.
Right.
Because originally it was just going to be how to be a stunt professional, but frankly, I can't remember who it was that came across it on the website. But the Don't Try This at Home, which is true, featured on there, so we renamed it. Though part of what we wanted to do, Keith, as well, and certainly in terms of the recognition of the skills and talent that it requires, was involve different aspects of stunts as part of the panels that we're putting on for the Action Festival. But to that end, beyond just the car chasers, I'd sort of contacted early on in the process the British Stunt Register and a woman called Kelly Fletcher who runs it, who's utterly fantastic. And once that she felt comfortable that we were not just for real, but I think a sense that that what we wanted to do had the right kind of integrity and aligned with what the Stunt Register as an incredible outfit with incredibly high standards. She was so supportive of being part of the festival. So part of what they did was she was the person who convinced the 3 stunt drivers, Steph Carey, Rick English, and Lloyd Bass, who have between them over 450 credits. It's astonishing to be part of the car chasers, to be the car chasers panel, talking about not just working on driving stunts, but the evolution of that they've done. But we also made a point of wanting to allow the Stunt Register to have their own panel, their own event at our festival, which really was for those who are interested in a career curious about how do I become a stunt professional? What do I need to do? Where do I go? Who can I ask? And so 2 of the panel from the car chasers, Rick English and Lloyd Bass, stayed on, and they were joined by another legend in the stunts world, Gary Powell, who came along and part of it as well. And it's fantastic because there's a sense of whilst people might appreciate certainly the level of professionalism involved, that obviously comes from something that's skilled, the fact that the level of teamwork that's involved, the level of training and specialism that there can be in all of this, I think is ultimately incredible, because as a number of them said, at some point, either you are putting your life in someone else's hands or they're putting their life in yours. And that sense of recognition, particularly when a lot of the scenes that they've put on in over the years are likely to be the very favorite scenes that you've seen in your favorite action films, that have required incredible meticulous planning and effort and an event to pull it off in the way they have. So that's what that particular event was about, and I was delighted to be a part of it.
Fabulous.
And
then, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. For What's the Score? As mentioned, that was something that Maria helped us put together. And we, obviously Maria's background working with Michael is very much on the music side of things. And we thought it would be interesting to sort of deconstruct the film score and see how the process of creating music alongside sound effects and everything else that's going on, how that process works, particularly in the field of action. We approached Stephen Price, who's the Oscar-winning composer for Gravity, but there's also been Edgar Wright's go-to composer over his last few films. And, we said, would you like to come aboard? And he was a bit sort of nervous at first because he's not done that sort of thing before. And he was going, I don't know if I could do it justice and, an action. And then he warmed to the idea, and we worked with him to try to construct something that was really different and special. And again, didn't know, how the audience would respond to it. We looked at some of the scores that had influenced him and got the clearances to show extracts from On a Message to Secret Service, The Ski Chase, and also we then looked at some of the films he'd worked on recently. And what he did was he had the sound stems, and he was joined by Bradley Farmer, who's the music editor he collaborates with regularly. And so you were able to look at sort of how sound and music is built up on the soundtrack of a movie in layers. And so we looked at Last Night in Soho. We looked at Beast, which is we had a privileged exclusive clip that for the film with Idris Elba that's coming out very shortly, and Stephen's on the score for it, and sort of saw how those were built up from the ground upwards. And it was amazing what you heard. And also he did the same thing with Gravity as well. It was amazing how you felt. You felt the experience enhanced and layered as the different things went on, and you realized you were listening to different things that were doing different things and having a different emotional impact on you that was sort of buried below the surface and yet still an impactful part of the score design. So I think people who went to that were genuinely surprised at how fascinating it was. My wife's loves music, studied music, great at piano, and she loves the greats, and she sat there and just went, wow, this was absolutely amazing. And had, I think, a whole new appreciation for the craft and skill that sits behind music composition for film. So that was truly a surprise. I think Stephen and Bradley both didn't know what to expect from the audience, and they're up for doing more. In fact, Maria thinks they should go on a world tour and take the lecture out, as a masterclass around the world.
Wow. No, I mean, again, yeah, I'm, film scores and composing for film is so important, and yeah, that sounds like an excellent event as well. Okay. And then, of course, you had the quiz night. So I heard a few stories about that. It was quite fun, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it was always something that we thought was that, again, we want there to be a communal atmosphere, and it's one thing sitting and watching things during the course of the day, but at some point you want to have a chance to sort of let off some steam. And so we put the quiz night was with Dick Finney, who you may know, who's runs a lot of the TV programming for the British Film Institute. He's a great guy, author behind the Missing Presumed White sort of initiative, and he knows everything about everything. So he and Martin, his friend Martin Coxhead, devised the quiz. But then we thought, how can we liven it up to make it slightly different? And so Marshall Julius, who's an influencer and has 110,000 followers, he's just written a brilliant book with Howard Berger, one of Hollywood's leading makeup artists. Big brain behind The Walking Dead and other great shows. And he's written the definitive book on makeup. I'm doing this a plug for you, Marshall. So Marshall came along and was like as each round was being marked up, he would go and he managed to get sponsorship from Funko Pop Vinyl and Playmobil. And so if you, as a member of the audience, were suddenly picked on, you could have the chance to win the Playmobil DD5 or Spider-Man or Superman Funko Pop vinyls, and it just meant that the audience were kept on their toes, and everyone really had a chance to win something that night, and it was a lot of fun. It was slightly chaotic, uncontrolled, but filled with humour and filled with warmth. And I think in the end, even people that went, if we saw someone looking miserable because no one was coming to them to ask them a question, we made sure they got a question. So people walked away sort of smiling, going, you know what, that was fun, and that's what we aim for.
Fantastic. No, it's great. Like you said, it's back to that sense of community around this, rather than with a passion for the genre, but a sense of community around it. So that's cool. And then there were some other special events here that you put on. Sorry, let me enlarge that a second. Again, I was there this day, but annoyingly, I wasn't actually able to attend these because I wasn't around until later on. But can you tell us a bit about some of this stuff? I know you ran one of them, Ron, because that's when I met you. You were just about to go in and do the class, and that's why I didn't talk to you too much. I just said, "Oh, I'll be in touch with you. I've got an idea," and that was it. So.
Well, no, all of those in their own way were special. Julian, do you want to talk about Gangs of London, and I'll talk about School Fight and touch on Right Hub?
Well, yeah, I mean, interestingly, Gangs of London. I mean, Gangs of London is I suppose, a perfect example of how something can come together in ways you don't necessarily plan or expect, Keith. Not to say that, when you do decide to do something, you've obviously got to do it properly and do, the right kind of level of professionalism and so on, because ultimately what you don't want to let down the people who are trusting you to get involved as well as the audience. But Gangs of London sort of started off on two fronts. It was firstly, a conversation instigated through Rosie Fletcher, who's the UK editor for Den of Geek, who's a passionate fan of Gangs of London, about looking to do something within the festival for Gangs of London. And obviously, given we are both film and TV,
yes,
and Gangs of London has, to quote, Corin Hardy, a shitload of action in it. It was literally that element was a no-brainer. But as much as it started, the first sort of dominoes were knocked over by Rosie. It sort of was added to by the fact that we completely independently of that approached Corin to be one of the directors for our Friday night discussion on action set pieces, and he himself suggested, look, not just as a love of action, but would you be interested in doing something could you do something around Gangs of London? Because if there was any, I suppose, not even hesitancy, was the fact that the premiere of season 2 isn't right round the corner. It's October. So it's one of those things, what's ready, what can people feel comfortable can be put out or not. Mm-hmm. But very rapidly together, and this was a credit to not just to Corin and to Rosie and to Premier PR and Sky and Pulse Films, who all rapidly got behind and this to say, look, what can we do? Rather than should we do something, it's what can we do? And it evolved essentially into an exploration of curiously, a parallel as well with School Fight, where rather than just a trailer or a clip, it was essentially a fairly extensive sequence, which was like 15 minutes long, something like that.
Yeah, it really was, and it wasn't just that we got to see the sequence. It was the preparation and work and care that Corin and Sky and Pulse went to, allowing us to see how that sequence was designed and built up from scratch, effectively. Sorry, Julian, you take this one on. Julian, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was there was just some noise from outside. I just muted myself from over.
Yeah, no. I was just saying that you never know. You just think sometimes someone wants to come out and talk, and that was not the case here. Corin did a really eloquent job, but also backed up with a lot of carefully put together materials that were up on screen, which allowed us to not just watch the set piece and experience it sort of as a piece of filmmaking, but also then to look at the previs and the storyboards and the previs, but animated and shown on screen side by side with the actual scene itself. So you really got a sense of how a director creates working off the page, something that is fully realized. And I think people were really fascinated by that, and also really loved the effort and care that went into building up the presentation.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was utterly fantastic, Keith. I mean, what Corin did, and prepared for the audience, really, was just utterly astounding. In part because it just shows. I'm sure there may be people who may not be interested in how the sausage is made. They just want to look at the final thing and just love it or not. But for those who really want to appreciate the craft, who really, by understanding how it's made, get to appreciate it even more,
Agreed.
this was a masterclass in layer upon layer of how to arrive at that final result and how it was put together. So in that regard, what Corin did for us was utterly fantastic. Now, equally, what I thought it was also really good was that it gave him and others an appreciation of what it was like to watch something that was only really destined for television on a big screen in front of 300 people. So that in itself, I think, that really has an impact as well, particularly on creatives, when all of a sudden you're seeing it in a different format. And I have to say that that's typically, I've seen it at BAFTA screenings a few times where it's been television content shown on BAFTA's big screen in the Princess Anne Theatre, where you can tell that the TV makers, the filmmakers, are looking around and experiencing something that they haven't come across before, because at most they've only maybe seen it with half a dozen others.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think, again, I think that's one of the, if you like, amazing things here is it is so important to celebrate the craft. And I like the fact that, you program that in so that, film geeks and filmmakers alike, aspiring filmmakers and whatever, can come in and get inspired and learn as well, and like you said, it gives us the chance to celebrate what these people go through, and the fact you had it focused around something that was TV as well, just sort of shows, because I do think the lines between cinema and television, they are blurring somewhat these days compared to years ago, in terms of like quality and levels of production and all of that sort of stuff. So I think that was really cool that you put that on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, it's as much the initiatives of people approaching us and throwing ideas at us rather than us sitting and having all the brilliant ideas ourselves.
Yeah.
That there's because also there's that sense, particularly as an inaugural event, that you can understand people being a little bit, if not reluctant, perhaps nervous or a little unsure as to how we're going to treat it. And to be fair, the nature of relationships that we had with people were actually very important in a number of these things, not least of which in the context of School Fight, which Ron was very much involved in sort of bringing together. And part and parcel of what this, I think, also showed is that people don't just exist in one particular silo. And in the case of School Fight and Damien Walters, here you have someone who has had a traditional start in some ways just within a stunt field, but ultimately has shown a desire, a skill, and has a through line, in evolving his career to the point that now, as a fully fledged director of his entire feature film, as opposed to being a second unit or action director or coordinator, is now responsible for everything. And really it was, with the fantastic collaboration of Marv, that we were able to put on, again, one of the most fun events of the festival.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to Marv, because we approached them early on and, weren't really on the map. And Ziggy Cabasa, who've known for some time, and also Erin Graham were brilliant. They said, you know what, I think this could be just right for you. Be interesting for Damien to come and present, some of the film, which is not due till next year, but we had sort of close to 20 minutes of footage in total shown. And Damien brought his cast, some of the leading stuntmen in the business as well that have moved into the role of actors. And I mean, it's a ton of fun. It's a comedy, but with some really impressive, ambitious stunt work. And I think Marv are to be congratulated, because it's what they've done is they've recognised they've got someone who's talented, that's got more capability. And Damien said, I feel like making a movie. And he didn't just sort of like sit down and work out, right, have I got enough pre-sales internationally? He just went out and started to shoot it himself with his friends. and they started to experiment with it, and they cut a kind of promo reel. And Matthew Vaughn took a look at it and said, "This is really bloody good. How can we help you, make it a proper film?" And that also echoes back to the Roger Corman school of filmmaking, which
Yes.
was taking a risk on interesting talent and seeing what happens next. And the results are that they've made this movie, which comes out next year. They're finishing up for next year, and then there's plans to do more beyond that. And that also was a really fascinating, look at sort of someone moving from the role of stunt coordinator, action designer into actual direction. Which is it's a big leap for someone who's used to taking big leaps, as he's one of the world's biggest free runners. But that was a great event. And then and Riot Club was in the vein of What's the Score and the Car Chasers, looking at sort of again bridging the gap between the audience and the industry as to sort of understanding more about the craft of what it takes to actually build up an action set piece. And there's a tendency to think, and sometimes there are scripts like this, which I think Julian cites Ben-Hur as, and then there's a chariot
Yes.
but the reality is that if you look at sort of the Die Hards and everything else like that, so much of it is layered into character and motivation, and it's part of the writing that starts in the mind and thrown onto the page, and then in collaboration with the director to fully realize. So we wanted to look at that, and we were fortunate in a way to sort of, it sort of came together that we managed to get someone who's got a lot of experience, Jeremy Drysdale, as who's had a series of successful films and a big hit on Netflix for an original movie. And then we also took someone called Kat Hall, who's I've done some work with and is a volunteer, who's just written her first, really good pilot teleplay, which has action elements in it, and is coming into the industry and getting some recognition and traction. And to sort of look at the industry from someone there and someone wanted to be there, and to present that to an audience of again, a mixed range of people in the industry, but fascinated by writing, people who are just members of the audience, but sort of are curious as to, well, how do you write an action set piece? And that's what we try to focus on that day, and just look at the industry in general. And you used the word before, which is if there's an aspiration of the festival, it's to be an inspiration, and to inspire people there to go, maybe I could do this, or if I did want to do this, how would I go about doing that? And if we've reached a few people in the audience that are sort of going, that's the day I'm going to remember. Like I remember when I went to cons as a kid, and I met people that like Ray Harryhausen, who would bring his stop motion puppets and just go, what, this is how you do it? It's real. This is the person who made those moments that I just experienced as a kid and thought, wow, if we can do that and help to do that this year and in years to come, then that's what we really hope we can achieve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's fantastic, and like you said, it makes the event more than just a film festival. And I don't when I say that, I don't want to take anything away from film festivals, because I love film festivals, but what I mean is you're trying to do something a bit different and a bit interesting with the format there, which I really appreciate. Talking of things I really appreciate, we move on to the 35th anniversary screening of Predator, which was perfect timing because it was literally a week before Prey dropped on Disney Plus. So it was just, again, great to see this on the big screen. It's always something that I'd seen on video and other home media formats. So wonderful to see it on the big screen, projected like that. Again, what a movie. I mean, this one, I always like this because it sort of blends three of my favorite genres. So, of course, it's definitely an action movie. You've got the biggest action star in the world at the time in this, but it's also kind of a slasher horror movie and a sci-fi movie and a bit of a mystery film as well, isn't it? And, great to have it on the big screen. And again, have John McTiernan tell stories that weren't covered on the audio commentary of the DVD. There was new stories that he was telling about this, which I was fascinated by. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, I mean, what was great about it, and by the way, that the fact that this was the week or so before Prey, again, is just one of these wonderful sort of happenstances. The that just, funnily enough, I'm hoping that things will settle down now, but in particular in the early sort of months of planning of this, Keith, it was often the case that films that we might get excited about being in proximity or close to or coinciding with a festival were sort of chopping and changing and moving around because COVID was still sort of playing, skittles with a lot of the release dates of films that existed. But
Sure.
with this, again, it's something it is incredibly special, not least of which because I'm sure it would be far less contentious. If you ask me the same question about all the sequels that followed this one compared to the sequels that followed Die Hard, that you don't really hold them in quite high esteem. But again, it's for the same reasons. It is, people forget sometimes, and I'm glad you reminded them, that it is this incredible mix of genres that you really don't get to see. And yes, it's science fiction, and yes, it's action, but certainly the horror aspect of it, where literally people are being picked off one by one by one, is something that really doesn't is not something that you often see in this particular space. So it combined things in a way which certainly haven't dated, in great part because so much of it were just practical effects being done. And just in fact, I think that if you were there, that John McTiernan memorably answered sort of as a question that if he was doing it today, would he do it differently? And I'm paraphrasing, but it was responding saying, look, no, technology are just tools. They're tools to achieve the same vision. So you just get to your same endpoint through different means. But it really is just a fantastic theme, not least of which, when you hear and understand the context as the reason why you have that scene where they're blazing away into the jungle. For 1 minute, I forget. I actually timed it at one point. I've forgotten exactly how long it is, and then it ends up with the phrase, "We hit nothing," and to know that was a very deliberate piece of sort of satire being put in by the director, I think it's brilliant. Those kind of moments getting revealed are just wonderful.
Yeah, and again, watching it, I mean, this is a film, well, like Die Hard, that I know sort of back to front because I've seen it so many times and owned it on every format and all of this sort of thing. But watching it, again, you just realize how tense the film is. How edge of the seat it is, and the fact that you don't really see the predator apart from what it sees for nearly an hour into the film or whatever it is. I don't know the exact timing, but it's quite a bit into the movie before you actually get a glimpse of the creature. And again, it's sort of a creature feature as well, in so much as you've got this scary, imposing alien. And I just loved it, and it was, as I said, so good to hear John tell some different stories about it. I mean, once he got warmed up that day, he really got going. He really got it.
He's very thoughtful in that sense, and it's funny because there are people who are, I suppose, who can sort of reel off anecdotes, time after time after time, and others that sort of, I think, sort of take their time and really do think about the question they're asked, rather than just feel I've got to automatically start to fill space. And there is a sense, because remember, this is 35 years old. This was his second film. So as much as he's had an incredibly career since, this was his first film after Nomads. And the level of expectation there was on this was pretty low. Considering everything that it has subsequently transpired to inspire. So I think to your point about that sense of revealing the creature late on, I mean, that's frankly that's in the Jaws playbook. It's in other great ones, which is, there's no greater fear or greater movie screen that you can play on than the inside of someone's head. So get in their head to get them imagine, feel, think about something, and the trouble is that you've then got to make the reveal worth it. And in this case, Stan Winston's work, when you finally do get to, I mean, I'm not going to obviously quote the famous line that comes from that reveal, but it's just, it's wonderful. And again, like so many other things, there are lines from this film that have gone down in pop culture.
Yes. Yeah.
And all I can really add to that is by completing the trilogy of press kits by showing you the
Ah!
the original press kit for Predator, again from its release, complete with everything in it. So I think my job's done on that one. No, but it was a joy to see it, and also on the big screen, and that was again, there was some nervousness when we were programming things at 9:30 in the morning, and a couple of people sort of said, "Oh, 9:30, why so early?" That was jam packed. 9:30 on a Sunday morning, and it's like if you have the right programming, doesn't matter what time you show it, they will turn up for it.
Yeah, I was there before 9, and there was already a queue.
It was. We were at one point we were really concerned because especially there'd been sort of run on tickets on the Friday evening, and and there were a number of ways in which people could obtain tickets, and we were really concerned down to the last ticket that that some people that we'd oversold, which would have been dreadful, but luckily we just about came in at the 341.
Yeah, cool. Well, I must admit, I'm very envious of your press kit collection. There must be a
That's
small
it. That's the only ones I've got. I don't want to sound like I haven't got many beyond that. It just happens that I because we were doing a renovation, I was like came across a stack of them from that time, and just literally found those three and just went, wow, okay, that's pretty good.
No, absolutely. So as I did for Die Hard, then Julian, you've kind of set it up a little bit for me there, but yeah, I am curious then because I've got thoughts on this. But what did you think of the Predator sequels?
Well,
And spin-offs?
again, I mean, some of them do genuinely suffer from a deficit of original ideas.
Yeah.
Some of them are sort of brave attempts where you're just swinging for something and just not quite making it. I mean, look, if you go straight into Predator 2, I suppose it's interesting when you realize the backstory of that there was initially an aim to bring together John McTiernan and Arnie into a sequel that was then going to combine him with Danny Glover's character, into that. It sort of went off the rails, and look, had the second one been a success, I think you wouldn't have then sort of started to explore the Alien Predator crossovers and the ones that have sort of disappeared since. I suppose that I have a really good soft spot for Nimrod, the Robert Rodriguez, Nimrod Amtal directed Predators, the one with Adrian Brody, because I think that was the one that captured closest in spirit to what it was trying to do, albeit with a wild bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
Very disappointed to some degree with Shane Black's entry, in part only, and I have to say it's only because of Shane Black, who has, by his own filmography, such an incredibly high, bar. Again, I mean, I could have filled an action festival just with stuff that Shane Black had written.
For sure.
Whether in particular, whether it's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or The Last Boy Scout, which
Last
again
Boy Scout, amazing.
Huge fan of.
Yes.
As a Bruce Willis film and a Tony Scott film and a Shane Black film that people often overlook.
Yeah.
That incredible sort of triumvirate of talent really came together for that one. But no, in the others, you'd tend to be, I suppose, derivative is probably the word that you feel that they're trying to do something. But I often wonder, this is where I hope to be a little generous. You often wonder to what extent filmmakers really got a chance to do what they wanted, as opposed to being constrained, and I'm not suggesting in a sort of David Fincher Alien 3 way, but really constrained, whether it's not enough money, not enough time to really do something that could have been a bit more. So I will always say, look, even if something's bad, it's always worth watching because there are often moments in it and ideas and moments that make you feel this could have been something more. So it's the equivalent of a golfer having one good, swing and an otherwise terrible round, because still something to hang on to.
Yeah. What about you, Ron? Have you got similar feelings?
Yeah, similar. I mean, I visited Predator several times. I haven't gone back to the other movies, and visited them. So I remember enjoying Predator 2 when it came out, not thinking it was as good as the original. I didn't dislike it, and and I like Danny Glover, but it didn't speak to me the same way the first movie did. And as Julian said, I think it echoes my sentiments to the series as well. And I haven't caught Prey yet. We've got both Julian and I have got some major catching up to do with movies. I've started. I saw Bullet Train. So I'm hoping to see Nope, but I've got to see Prey, and I've got to carve the time away. I may do that this weekend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, much like with Die Hard 2, I've kind of got a soft spot for Predator 2 as well, and of course, don't forget Robert Davi. So,
Yes.
but yeah, so that's good. But I have to say, Prey, I really enjoyed that. So I don't want to
Good.
pick that up. But yeah, but I mean, we've obviously we've talked about action movies here that are part of a franchise and are from that era. And again, when we talk about that era, we talk about Joel Silver and Jerry Bruckheimer sort of being, if you like, the two pinnacles of quality production, of course, with the Broccolis as well for Bond and stuff. But and what I loved, in fact, the screening I probably enjoyed the most out of everything, and I liked all of it, but I really did have fun on your final screening, which was Conair, and simply because, whereas I said I know Die Hard and Predator, I've seen them so many times and own them on various formats and all of this sort of thing. Conair, I'm fairly familiar with, and I've had it on Blu-ray and whatever, but I hadn't actually watched Conair in a long time, and it was a real treat to see this. And it's funny because I think about, we've talked about, as I said, franchise movies, but one of the things I've always enjoyed, which is getting harder to do nowadays because everybody wants IP and content and shared universes and all of that sort of stuff. But in the 80s and 90s and whatever, you had a lot of what I call quality standalone action movies, and I'm thinking things like The Rock, The Last Boy Scout that you've already mentioned, uh, Executive Decision. I always thought was a great standalone action movie, and I was going to say actually Jan de Bont's Speed, but thinking about it, that's not true because they did make
you can't Cruise Control. You can't ignore that.
No. It is a great standalone movie because you simply don't mention the second one.
You don't exactly. It should be a standalone movie, yeah. But Conair being one of Bruckheimer's films, and kind of, they say, sort of part of that what do they call it, the holy trinity of Nicolas Cage, because obviously he had this and The Rock with Bruckheimer, but then he also with John Woo had Face Off around the same time. But yeah, and to have Simon West come and discuss this again, things that weren't necessarily on the special features or the commentaries of the home media selection and whatever, was fantastic. So I really do applaud you for ending the event with this, because from my perspective, the whole cinema had such fun, and they were quoting and applauding on certain lines, and it was loud in that cinema, and you just realized just how bonkers this film was, but in a good way. So yeah, tell us about this.
Well, this was again, in some respects, part of this comes back to one of the first questions you asked us, Keith, which is, how, getting to invite John McTiernan, and it's similar to Simon West. I mean, the only difference with Simon's, not living on the west coast of the US, of North America, he's living in Oxfordshire. But in that regard, it starts with the film, because ultimately you're looking to celebrate something that is special and big screen special, of which there's not a shortage. There was a sense, I think, to some degree, of trying to find things that fitted a certain anniversary, because it would give you a reason to play it or narrow it down. It's something. It doesn't mean that you have to, because obviously Die Hard isn't celebrating it's celebrating its 35th anniversary next year, not this year.
Yeah.
But
does that mean we get to play it again?
What's that?
Yeah.
We may just have to play it every single year. Otherwise, those Santa hats aren't going to sort of get worn down by themselves, are they? So, no, it's with Conair again. Look, it's a film I dearly love, precisely because it's bonkers, but it knows it's bonkers and it's setting itself up to entertain. And yet in order to entertain, all the filmmakers had to take what they did very seriously. From the casting, and part of what I love about this is the casting of the film. Not just, I mean, in contrast to actually not in contrast to Predator and Die Hard, which has you've got wonderful casting but very much a central character. Here you absolutely have an incredible ensemble
Yes.
of some fantastic actors that Simon West, by his admission, was talking about, just had the chance to take his pick, and go out and cast, not least of which, John Malkovich as Cyrus the Virus. But it's the fact that they did it. It is bombastic in the best possible way, and that's the thing. It's not just about chaos and mayhem with no purpose. It's got to be done in a way that's really done well, because otherwise just throwing stuff at the screen, throwing money at the screens, explosions at the screen, stunts at the screen, without purpose, without that right mix of ingredients, just doesn't work. And we've all been in films that have ended up being less than the sum of its parts. But this one very much was more. And in fact, I think I've heard it mentioned a few times, as opposed to some that were revered as utter classics when they first came out, such as Die Hard. And I don't know about Predator. I'm not sure that over time, but Conair really has matured. People have really come to love it and appreciate it, because it got overlooked at the time because it was so close to The Rock and Face Off. That it didn't stand out as much, and it really is over time. And I think what stood out for me was reaching out to Simon through a mutual friend called Andy Briggs, who's a really fantastic writer who knows Simon and who just affected the introduction. And then really about saying, look, we'd love to play it as the closing night film at our festival. Not realizing for one moment until the night came along that he'd not seen it on a big screen in 25 years. There was only one print in the country, and let's see what condition that's in.
And he'd never actually shown it to his family on the big screen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There were, members of his family who weren't even born when the film was shown, so they were seeing it on the big screen for the first time.
Simon was brilliant.
It was a wonderful family affair. It was a wonderfully entertaining affair. I'm so glad that you enjoyed that sort of wonderful way to go out, Keith, because that's what we felt it was. It really was just an entertainment high, and a wonderful taste to leave in your palate at the end of the film.
I mean, it's so hard to believe it's 25 years. I was in film school in the US when this came out, and I remember going to see it like on opening night, at the multiplex, just going and just having such fun with it. And then, lots of people, especially at film school, you get quite a few film snobs and stuff that was like, it's low art, and all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, not nonsense. It's brilliant. And this
it was lovely, as Julian said, it was a family affair, and it was lovely to see Simon Orris reunited with a member of his family, which is his own filmmaking. And at one point, he was so into to answer the questions, he got so into it, and I think you would have seen that yourself, that his own daughter asked the question, and he didn't realise it was his own daughter asking the question.
That was funny.
But it was, that was also, you felt like you were at something that was special. It wasn't just another roadshow. It wasn't just another sort of screening where someone was touting something. There was a sort of a reunion between the filmmaker and his work with an audience that really loved it, and that was made it special.
Yeah, and I mean, what a cast, in this as well. I mean, obviously Nick Cage is, but Malkovich at his best. I mean, they're all playing their own. And even though John Cusack allegedly doesn't like the film and didn't enjoy it, I mean, his performance in it is fantastic, right? So it's kind of. I really thought it stood up, and I had such a great time with it. And really, I think having it on a 35mm print that did have a bit of damage here and there, but it kind of added to it. I really.
It's like vinyl for movies.
Yeah, exactly. Vinyl for movies. I like it.
We'll have to think about that. We'll have to think about that for other occasions, Keith. If we've got choices between 35mm and a DCP, which do we go for?
Tricky one. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it was just my nostalgia goggles a bit, but I enjoyed it. It was a blast to finish on, and the audience, from what I could tell, loved it. I mean, it was the atmosphere in that room was fantastic, and as I said, you know, I knew the film well, but I didn't know it as well as Die Hard or Predator. So yeah, for me it was quite special. So I really enjoyed that.
All right. Well, I'm really glad to hear it. Look, firstly, as for you as a film enthusiast coming along, Keith, I mean, look, that's ultimately what you want to deliver. You know, is a sense of for those who are knowing what to expect, you've got to deliver again that big screen experience. But then again, for those people who kind of remember or familiar with the film, may not have seen it on a big screen or seeing it for the first time. Again, you're hoping that it delivers, and again delivers it in a with a collective audience that's just going
Yeah.
to sort of lift the energy in the room. So similar to Predator, again, we had just queues of people. You know, that was pretty sold out as well. So I was, yeah, it was a great way to end.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I mean, I've got one other question for you about this, but before I ask that, I just wondered, is there anything that you guys, while you're here on the platform, and we'll talk about where this might go in the future and stuff, but is there anything else that you want to sort of add to anything that I may not have asked you so far?
Go ahead, Bron. I've got a couple of thoughts there.
Well, I think that, you know, there what I think what we've ended on with that last screening is the perfect combination, because, you know, one of the ethos was in terms of designing events and how we cut, you know, we measure them out, we make sure they run at the right length. Not that we got that right all the time, but is, you know, the ethos is always want them leaving more. And I think we achieved something at the end of this, which actually was a double header, which is always leave them wanting more, but we also wanted more as well. There were so many things that we wanted to do that we couldn't quite do this time. There's so many things that we think we can do with the festival going forwards, which, you know, a festival's a name, but I think it's a genuine celebration and, you know, a communal experience. You know, it's part con, part festival, you know, it's its own thing. So yeah, it's left us wanting to do more, and there's much more I think we can do with this. And I think hopefully now we have audience confidence, which, you know, is not easy to earn, and industry respect too. So we hope that, you know, with a year to plan the next one, we can come back bigger, brighter, bolder, stronger.
That's good.
Well, but what we also hope as well, you know, in all of this, Keith, is if the stuff that people knew about might have been what brought them in, we're hoping it's the stuff that they didn't know about or didn't really think about that they took away with them, that will make them talk about it more, think about it more in terms of what they'll come along to on another occasion. You know, because ultimately you want to create an atmosphere where you do get a chance to surprise people. You know, it's wonderful. We're, you know, as delighted as we can be that a Conair and a Predator and a Die Hard deliver, we know they can. It's the reaction to something that's like School Fight that people will have literally seen for the very first time in front of, or Gangs of London. You know, those are pretty special again, precisely because, you know, this is a, you know, there's no baggage here. People are watching this for the first time.
Cool. And what I wanted to ask you both as well is, what, if you had to take away anything, what's the biggest thing that you learned from this experience?
Wow.
Oh wow!
Well,
the biggest thing, there is just so much. There is so much in a good way, really. But
Okay.
it was Julian. You, sorry, I think I interrupted you. So
no. It's honestly, I mean, so much of it genuinely can just be summarized in 4 letters, which is TIME.
Yeah.
Time.
Yes.
It really is. I mean, there's a sense of, even if you have all the time in the world, there's still things that you won't have time to do because it won't come. You know, there's no point asking someone to participate way too early because they won't know their schedule. So there's always that balance. In fact, actually, one thing that Ron sort of brought into the conversation very early on from his theatre background, you know, I can't. Who was the person that you know?
It's
the
Mark Bentley, who's one of the key producers behind the Play That Goes Wrong franchise, and
Yes.
you know, I worked with him on the Twilight Zone, which I produced on stage.
Oh yes, I saw that. Fantastic.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. And he said the old adage for theatre is it's too early, it's too early, it's too early, it's too late, and particularly with live, you know, live experiences, that is just so true. It's the timing of when you make a decision, the timing of what decision you make at the time you make it, which has knock-on effects on everything that follows. it's Herculean. That's exactly what the whole process is. And I think, we're always learning. I think you're in danger the minute you stop learning. But the interesting thing is, I think what was a real test of Julian and myself working together with Lee, who's been fantastic, Lee Van der Molen, with Stuart Peter, who was an investor that backed us, with our advisory board, which is some amazing people in Nathan, for example, who's the former Empire editor, Colin Burrows at Special Treats, who was brilliant, Ashanti Omkar, our cultural content advisor. There were just so many, and Maria Giacchino, there's so many people that contributed so much to allowing us to take this forward and make it happen. And the learning is inevitable, especially when Lee says, Lee often gets asked, how many people did it take to put on the London Action Festival? And he says 12. Julian was 5 of them, Ron was the other 5, and I was 2, which is ungenerous because he was as much 5 as we were. But I think what we learned was that you have to make the best decision you can based on the information you have. Not beat yourself up when that turns out to be the wrong decision. Learn from something, because it was like standing on quicksand at sometimes in terms of programming coming in, dropping out, and thinking, how do we curate something that looks like it's been curated? But I think you just got to hold your nerve. You got to fight through. Julian was always there for me when I was just going, oh my, is this going to work? Are we able to do this? And I hope I was the same for him as well. It was genuinely a untested team, the magnificent 3.5 thrown together, and hoping that we would do something that registered with people. And we're always learning. We will always learn. There's so many things we can do better, but we hope we made our mark this first time out in a way that's going to allow people to go, you know what, I'm going to give that a shot next year.
But now that Ron sort of talked it up, I'm going to talk it down ever so slightly, Pete, which is it's not rocket science, and frankly, we can take inspiration from the organisers of Fright Fest, the organisers of other festivals, where what you realise is that having found or created a niche which is underserved, as certainly horror was when Fright Fest first started. The idea that ultimately what you're serving there is both the creators who make the content and the audience who enjoy it. We're the middlemen in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to do as good a job as we possibly can to make sure that the audience is given stuff that they really enjoy, but also potentially, serve the kind of things that they might not expect or they weren't sort of aware of. And in exactly the same way, which is sort of for creatives, is ultimately, connecting them to the audience, the right kind of audience that really is going to enjoy their work the most. So there are plenty of film festivals that exist around the world. I'm sure there'll be room for more. But the fact that this was an area that was very underserved, not completely unserved, because you've got other ones, the Fighting Spirit Festival, for example, that's playing next month, that focuses on martial arts. That's certainly actually got one genre, one specific element of it, rather than sort of the global showcase we were looking at. But in all of these, ultimately, they look to serve an audience. And you've got to realize that audience is there, because this is the audience that turns out for these films, one of the few audiences turning out for films at the big screen, when they come to town. So, in that regard, I don't think we underestimated the effort that was required. But I think, like anything else, you've got to be very, very zen about it. We can do the really, really hard. We just can't do the impossible.
Cool. That's very nicely put. Absolutely. So, if people want to get in touch or find out more information, I will obviously put links, etc., in the show notes. But other than what I sort of put on this slide here, have I missed anything? It's info@londonactionfestival.com, right? And that's where your website is as well. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, well, also on the website are our individual at London Action Festival email addresses as well, and we hope that we are approachable to people, especially if they've been supporting us. If they've got questions or queries about what we did, why we did it, how we did it, and what's next, we'll try and answer them as best as we can.
Cool. Okay. Well, we'll be looking out. I mean, I went. Fright Fest has been running for over 20 years, and I think I went for the first time 10 years ago. And I've been every year since, so I'm sure it'll be the same with the London Action Festival. So that's fantastic.
I have to ask one question of you, though, Keith, which
Sure.
is right back at you, which is we've got to talk about what your favorite action movies are. I mean, there's got to be some sense. I know Die Hard's in there, and I'm not going to ask you to pick one or two because we'll just put this on pause for a week. You know, what are in your top action movies that immediately come to mind? The kind of stuff you'd like to see on a big screen.
Okay, well, I'm obviously a big Bond fan, so that covers 25 movies straight away there, right? But because I love all of them for that. Raiders of the Lost Ark was a big inspiration for me as a child. In fact, that's what got me interested in films in general was Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think that's an amazing film. We mentioned earlier, I think Speed is an absolutely incredible film as well. The first one, the original Jan de Bont's film. The Rock. As I said, I reeled off a load of what I think are I-class sort of is intelligent action movies, and and I'm really happy I sort of grew up as well in that home video era. So there was all the Schwarzenegger and Stallone movies, whether it's Rocky or Rambo or whether it's the Terminator or Total Recall. I was glad to have enjoyed all of that stuff. But there's great stuff today. I love the Matrix films. I like the Fast and Furious films. The quality I don't think has been consistent, but they've been fun. John Wick. Looking at stuff today, and even of course, even before all the films I've mentioned, there's been fantastic. I like big Clint Eastwood fan. His Dirty Harry films and stuff. Bullet with Steve McQueen. There's the French Connection. All of those ones.
Well, those three all made an appearance in some shape or form during the festival events. I think you weren't able to attend, but they were represented.
Good. I mean, it is like I shouldn't have put you on the spot with it because now it's back on me. It is like an impossible question to answer.
No, we've just been making notes about what we're going to do next year, so it's very helpful for us, Keith.
No, absolutely. Just a few before we wrap it up, because we've been nearly the length of a Die Hard movie here with this, so we've probably got to wrap this up. If you have enjoyed this video, please do check out some of the other work on this channel. As I said, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Follow on social media. You can get in touch with the channel. Follow us on at Home Media Minefield, or you can email at lswotcast@gmail.com. So let's see what's out there, cast@gmail.com. If you want to see some of my creative work, I've got another YouTube channel called British Isles, EYLES, as in my last name. And you can see some short films that I've made over the years, going right back to film school on there. So please check that out. I also need to plug, I am working on a feature at the moment with my good friend Mike Tack called Car Cam, which we hope to have out before the end of this year. But that just really leaves me to thank my two guests, Ron, Julian. I really appreciated having this chat with you tonight. Thanks so much for giving your time.
Thanks for inviting us, Keith. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
No
Keith.
worries. I really hope people go and check out the London Action Film Festival, and it will be the first of many. And as I said, I'll put all the information, etc., in the show notes. But for now, thank you both, and thank you out there if you're still watching for joining us. And we'll see you at the next Home Media Minefield Presents. Let's see what's out there. Bye for now.